It's Doug McIntyre, the editor-in-chief at 24/7 Wall Street, and I'm with Lee Jackson, who is our sort of senior economist and expert on public companies. But today we're going to talk about cars that were discontinued, in some cases, very famous ones, and then a couple of iconic brands that may not be what they used to. So we've got people who used to be really big and sort of have fallen off, and then car brands that are just absolutely gone. So I'm going to kick this off with Ford because Ford is really, of all the American car companies, it's the oldest of all the large brands. Henry Ford, turn of the century, basically invents the modern assembly line, invents the car for the masses, the Model T. Now is not in phenomenal shape, is it, Lee?
No, it's not, because as we've discussed in the past, Japanese ingenuity, Japanese expertise in design has jumped in. And while Ford maintains the iconic stature with the F-150, I think the Mustang is still very popular. They're certainly very noisy, the Mach 3. And I think they're fighting to hold on to their turf that they've had for so long.
They really hoped that they had an EV future. And I noticed January sales for Ford, which just came out, they sold less than 3,000 of those F-150 Lightnings. And I think at this point, they thought they'd be selling, tens of thousands a month. Didn't work out.
Well, you would certainly think their analytics would have showed them how many F-150 owners are not in urban areas and, can't be away from chargers and things of that nature, or even have charging ability at their own places. So, yeah, I think they really miscalculated this bad, as did Chevrolet.
Big miss. Let's move over to Jeep, another big time iconic brand, basically a World War II invention by the U.S. military. There were no four-wheel drive cars in America. We grew up in an era where rear-wheel drive was it. Now, Jeep is doing okay, but think of what they started. All-wheel drive is universal now across car brands. So what happened to Jeep? It was sort of big, and now it's got a huge amount of competition.
Well, I think, as we discussed before, they've turned into like this almost cult-like iconic brand, and they're very expensive, and they're not very comfortable to ride in, and they're kind of difficult to get in and out of. But there's a large segment, I think, of the population that loves to four-wheel drive. They like to get off-road, and if nothing else, they're well built, they hold together good, and they hold their value. And apparently they're one of the most stolen vehicles. My son's was stolen in San Diego, and the police said, don't worry about it. It's in Tijuana and it's taken apart. So I think
that's right.
They'll never have the huge market share that other brands have. But I think just the sheer love of the brand of the owners will continue to keep it going good.
One of the ironies about Jeep is, if you think about it, it's an iconic brand. They've been attacked by the Indian tribe, Cherokee. A much, much older, call it a brand in some ways.
Was it really the Indian tribes?
No, the Cherokee Nation went after Jeep, I think 3 or 4 years ago, and said, hey, look, you're using our tribal name to help sell SUVs. And there was quite a dust up. I don't know if any money ever changed hands, but this is a tangent, but it's sort of like the Kansas City Chiefs thing. There's a point now in American culture where using Indian names is not okay anymore.
Well, I guess it depends on what franchise it is. The franchise where the chief is on the helmet of the Washington Commanders / Redskins, they've complained that the name should come back. So yeah, I think it's always a question that. And I think that Jeep still has Cherokee marketed, don't they? And Grand Cherokee?
One or both of those is still
Yeah,
around.
I think they do. I think they do. So
Get knocked out of the box.
it's probably likely that they did help pay for casino expansion or something like that.
So now we've got two brands, a pair of famous old American brands, Lincoln and Cadillac. And these guys owned the luxury car market in the United States through the 70s, well into the 80s. And what happened? It was theirs.
Well, again, there's numerous ways and fingers that can be pointed, but I think design issues were a huge part of it, because you look at how it took them forever to get out of the El Dorado phase and the old Fleetwood phase to get to newer ideas, and like the Escalade and the newer sedan models, and they just didn't resonate with people. They look odd. They don't have the kind of relaxed flow that even the design used to have at Cadillac. And I think that they just became known to younger generations as cars that old people bought, and the same with Lincoln.
I think 5 years ago, I saw a study that said Lincoln owners had the highest median age of any car brand in the United States. And
I totally believe that.
Yeah, they built a bunch of models that they hoped would bring the age down. They didn't. The thing that Lincoln does well now is like the Navigator. I mean, these cars that can be used as limos for rich people.
Exactly.
Is not a bad business for them. But if you think about it, the Germans, particularly Mercedes and BMW, came in and just stole share from them. And then the Japanese started luxury brands. Lexus was created by Toyota, Acura by Honda, Infiniti by Nissan.
Yep.
All of a sudden, a market that they had completely to themselves. You've got people coming from across the Pacific and across the Atlantic. And
it was a smart idea, because when you look at their standard brands versus their luxury brands, they can interchange a lot of the parts, a lot of the chassis, a lot of that. And so it's simple. I mean, obviously they're better cars, but a lot of those improvements are accoutrements to the interior or things of that nature. So it was extremely smart on their part.
Yeah. Let's move to Chrysler. Chrysler was once the third of the big three. And at some point, Mercedes bought them, and then, they went through ownership changes. They're now owned by the Italian company Stellantis. But this is an example of a car brand where they got rid of all the models. It was like the model line used to be 10 or 15 cars.
Yeah, it was extensive. Yeah, absolutely.
It's a minivan brand now.
It is a minivan company.
They have dismantled all of this. I mean, one of the great stories in American car history is when Chrysler was heading into bankruptcy. Remember Lee Iacocca? He'd been the president of Ford. He was the father of the Mustang.
The father of the Mustang, right?
They brought him in, and he became an American hero for turning around Chrysler. And I think he'd be unhappy if he saw that all that was left of Chrysler was a minivan, which I think he also invented.
He did, I think. He was certainly instrumental in that design. And, Iacocca was so far ahead of everybody else. If he'd stayed at the forefront of design in Detroit, they wouldn't have had this issue. But they were so arrogant. And again, we've talked about this as well. You and I both grew up there. Everybody I knew either worked for the car companies directly, or they worked for a parts maker. I had a friend that was a lawyer his dad was a lawyer for GM, and they just were so huge and so massive, and they took their eye off the design ball, and which is kind of happening now. I saw an advertisement sort of current SUV designs. They all look the same. They're all the same, whether it's the Equinox or the Nissan Rogue. They all look the same. And I think that was part of the problem that Chrysler didn't see coming before they hit the dirt.
let's look for a second at GM became an engine of efficiency, financial efficiency in the 2000s. And so they basically knocked off Pontiac, Olds, and Saturn, which was Pontiac and Olds were decades old. Saturn had been probably when they closed, it was 10 or 15 years old. This is really an example of the fact that a car conglomerate can literally say, we can't make money on these brands. We're going to kill them off, and we'll make money on our strong, powerful brands. We don't need the other ones.
Yeah, I think that was the case. And they had kind of duplicate brands. I mean, there was a Camaro and a Firebird. There was sedans that were all the same between their other companies. And I think that was probably one of the reasons, because they ended up probably competing with themselves in many cases.
I think that was the problem. They were poaching from each other because at that point, I think GM had 7 brands, and it was too many. How many people are going to buy a pickup? Well, if 6 brands have pickups, that's a problem. If 6 have station wagons. So I think that's right. If you look at those cars, like the Pontiac Bonneville was close to competing with things like the Cadillac. So it was like, well, which mouth are you going to feed? And it's
or the Oldsmobile 98 used to compete. In that higher, almost luxury car level. So again, they were kind of eating themselves from in, and probably just the sheer overhead and dealership costs, inventory loans, everything that goes with, and as well as I do, that car dealers don't make any money on cars or new cars. I mean, they make a little bit, but all that money is made on service. It's all service driven. And when you have so many brands, you can only keep circulating the parts and everything so long, especially when you're not selling those cars to service.
So the brand that is really being sunset this year is Dodge. Really the iconic muscle car brand. They are discontinuing those 700 horsepower, coupe and 4-door monsters. And
will you be grabbing one of those quickly before they go out of production there, Doug?
Well, I guess that's a case where there was not a market for a car that got 9 miles to a gallon when you have all these other sports cars that are available. I mean, the sports car market now is very crowded.
It is. And it was interesting because I did see a lot of Challengers over that 8-year or 10-year slot where it kind of jumped back in popularity. But now what I'm seeing, I saw 4 of them yesterday. I mean, the new Corvette, which is, I don't know, close to 100,000, 80,000.
Yeah, no, it's a $100,000 car.
I mean, it is just radically redesigned. It looks like a Porsche or some sort of European sports car. And I saw 4 of them yesterday. One was in bright blue, one was in red. I mean, they were real standout cars. So it'd be interesting to see how long they can continue to sell very expensive Corvettes.
Yeah. Well, as we say goodbye to one another, I'm going to make a prediction. Either Cadillac or Lincoln will not exist in 5 years. I think
I'll put my chips on Lincoln being gone.
Okay. I don't know what the value of those brands are to those 2 companies. I know that they do okay in China, but do you keep a brand in place with all the development costs, keeping all, in essence, the manufacturing costs in the United States? I mean, you're not selling very many.
Well, especially after these huge contracts were signed recently with the UAW. I mean, they're going to have to cut costs somewhere.
Yeah. Well, that's my closing prediction. Either Cadillac, Lincoln, or both will be gone in, I'm going to say 5 years. So thank you.
That's probably a pretty good. I wouldn't bet against that prediction. That's for sure.
No. Good to see you again. Thanks. And I'll catch up with you in a couple of days.
Thanks a lot, Doug. Enjoyed it.